Hello, everyone. Welcome to another webinar series of Gable. Today, we're going to talk about strategies for engaging remote and on-site employees. I'm very excited to introduce to you our speakers. But before that, just a little bit of a housekeeping tips and rules. Make sure that if you want to comment or ask questions, make sure that your Zoom chat setting is set to everyone. Please, this is a discussion. Feel free to ask questions. We will have a Q&A section at the end. And also, we will send a recording of this after. Also, let's get to know each other. Please write in the comments your name, your role, company, and where you're done from. And without further ado, I'll start with introducing our speakers. David, let's start with you.
Oh, so you want me to go first?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Hi, David Hausman. I need to update that pic. I missed my hair, but times have changed. VP of Global Real Estate and Workplace at Logitech. My role at Logitech is forward-facing and also back of house. So for the back of house side of things, we run all of the real estate around the world, 90 locations, 7,000 employees, manufacturing, distribution, office, R&D, retail. And for the front of house, we deal with customers every single day. We are the market leader in video conferencing, and hopefully you have a Logitech mouse and a keyboard, maybe even a camera. So we make peripherals that make everyday hybrid work. And we are at the forefront of future ways of working. And so we meet with customers all the time. We're part of the research and development process. I lead, and also Lisa is on the Logitech advisory board for enterprise product development. And so it's an interesting role. I jumped back in from consulting to join Logitech because of the duality, the being part of the core business and then having street cred running the portfolio behind the scenes.
Danielle from Okta.
Yeah, that's what we'll need to establish. Right?
This is what we're going to establish. Yeah, we're going to go like this. Danielle, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Lisa. I'm Danielle. I have spent many untold years in the world of commercial real estate, doing a lot of different types of roles. I've spent the last 10 years or so in the world of workplace operations and services. I currently serve as Senior Director of Global Workplace Operations for Okta. If you're not familiar with Okta, Okta is the world's identity company. We secure identity so everyone is free to safely use any technology.
Incredible. And Daniel.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel, currently the Director of Employee Experience at Veza. I've been in the workplace and employee experience for about 7 years now. But to me, it kind of feels like, I don't know, to you guys too, it kind of feels like 70 years. I feel like I'm in my Obama era where after 7 years, I'm like kind of growing a little bit. So yeah, excited to have the conversation and thanks for having me.
Excellent. So a little bit about Gable, those of you who don't know, we are an all-in-one platform to help your remote and hybrid employees together. We have 4 different products. One is our on-demand product that basically provides access to thousands of co-working spaces globally distributed. We have our ability to have desk reservation and booking in your own HQs and serviced offices. We provide visitor management capabilities, and finally, event orchestration, which really ties well to what we're going to talk about today on how to bring your employees together. For those of you who know me, know I'm a very much data-driven person. I love stats. Wanted to share this really interesting data piece here related to why people are coming to the office. And I think when I initially saw this, it was very much aligned with what we see at Gable, that the reason why people are coming to the office is not for the space, it's for the people, right? This is the number one reason why people are coming, is to collaborate and engage and feel connected. And this really leads me to the question to the audience, and what is the biggest challenge in keeping employees engaged from your perspective in a hybrid workforce? We'll close the polls in a second. Okay, let's close it. Interesting to see. Okay, fostering collaboration, relationship building, and trust is the first, and then maintaining a strong culture. So again, really focus on people. Excellent. Very much aligned with what we see, by the way, and the survey itself. So without further ado, I actually want to start by asking our great panelists to describe a little bit about their workplace strategy, both in terms of remote employees, hybrid offices, anything that you can share there. And Danielle from Okta, I'll start with you.
Yeah, definitely. I think that like many companies, Okta is really focused on how do our spaces need to change, so top of mind, alignment with company goals, fostering connection, like we just saw, I see in my own team, and of course my team scattered around the world, it's when you're in business relationships, you want to be able to lean on, you don't want every conversation to be, hey, I have a problem with this, right? And so you want to be able to lean into other interactions and how are we a community? How are we working together? So fostering connection and then coming together with ease and with intention. And what does that look like? And how do we build programming to enable that across the organization? So I think as we look forward to our workspaces, whether those are our actual hub locations, whether those are serviced office locations, and as we think about our distributed workforce, those goals are really top of mind.
Excellent. And Danielle, you've also did transition and your focus is on employee experience. Can you share a little bit about what does employee experience mean in a distributed workforce, especially focusing on both hybrid and remote employees?
Yeah, totally. Oh, for me or Danielle from Okta?
Yeah, for you, Danielle from Veza.
Okay, we're gonna go Danielle from Okta and just like Jake from State Farm, and then okay, cool. Yeah, totally. So I have the unique ability to kind of have the opposite of Danielle from Okta, and I'm gonna go David from Logitech because they have thousands of employees, right? Like thousands and thousands. They were just talking right before about all the hubs that they have and like all the distributed workspace, and like that is like insane when I think about it from my scale. And I see a lot of specialists in the chat. We have like less than 200 employees. So we've got one space, we've got one location. We are a startup that's like 4 years old. And so with that comes the unique challenge and also interesting idea that every single person in the company can have a direct impact on the workplace and experience. And that kind of changes up your strategy a little bit, right? Because every single person can become an ambassador to your culture and what you're trying to do. Every single person can be involved in any sort of program that you're trying to make. So it's a really interesting dynamic, and that's what I've been really focusing on, especially being new at the company.
Excellent. And David, one, of course, I'm a personal fan of Logitech, and I think one of the great things with Logitech is the fact that you're also building tools for hybrid and remote employees. And I think this is very interesting how Logitech implements hybrid and remote policy as well. So if you can talk a little bit about that, basically, what is your current model of hybrid, remote, or overarching policy?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So if you think about Logitech, we were a $2 billion company before the pandemic. We're north of 5 billion. We've had an amazing ride over the last 4 years. And our goal is to double revenue. So we are growing, growing, growing. We are not trying to grow our office portfolio, but we are trying to grow engagement. And so we started very carefully because we're in the hybrid business. You've all read in the New York Times and, on the news every night, there's a mandate and it's failing and employees are revolting and they wrote a letter to management and there's a disconnect between the C-suite and the everyday employee. we couldn't afford to be in the New York Times for failing. So we're trying to lead from behind, lead with our metrics, lead by example, leverage our own technology, our hardware, our software. And the story is slow, but we're measuring our progress against ourselves, and it's been successful. So what we started with is co-creating our strategy. We didn't want it to be tops down. We wanted every employee to be involved. And so we went on roadshows. We had 32 roadshows around the world where we had 100 different people come in breakout sessions, talk about hybrid work. And what we decided to do was continue working remotely, but build back face-to-face moments that matter. Where we landed is 2 to 3 days a week on site, expectation, not mandated, expectation, which we define a little bit differently. Because we're a global company, we're working all hours of the day and into the evening and the morning. And so we can't expect our employees to commute every day like that. And then we based our 2 to 3 days on one site, Gravity Day. So there's one day that the site chooses where it's, mayhem, and there's a lot of activities and vibes and good vibes and things going on. And then 1 to 2 team Gravity Days. And we really focused on training employees or retraining and retooling employees so that when they come on site, they're doing things that they don't do at home. We're making the commute worth it. We're still obviously working on that, but we have a meeting and events playbook for managers. We have, speed networking that we do. We have an Ask Anything session with a leader. We make sure that when people travel around the world that we're highlighting that they're in the office. And then we have software and we leverage, Gable as well, so that people know where folks are going to be, so that if they see someone's going into a Gable or they see someone's going into a hub, we see that there's sort of this power in numbers.
Incredible. One, so many programs. It's also very hard to manage, I believe. Just a lot of initiatives. In that sense, and we'll talk a little bit about data and measuring impact there. But Danielle from Okta, curious to hear, because in terms of company size, it's pretty similar to Logitech, thousands of employees, both multiple offices, serviced, actual hubs. How, if you can talk through two things. One is, what is the current strategy in bringing people together, whether those are remote employees or in office? We'll start with that question.
Yeah, so the strategy has really been, one of flexibility. I think that, like David mentioned, Okta doesn't want to invite mass attrition with a mandate or an RTO or anything like that. And I think that, so we've had a very, come to work when you want. There's a strong culture of getting together in person for team building events and so forth. And I think a lot of teams have really been very proactive in scheduling offsites and bringing folks together around an agenda. And then, as we're kind of moving through this process, we're really discovering that that piece of coming together with intention is really, really important. We don't want to lose the flexibility, but how are we enabling our managers and our leaders to bring people together? And so we're really working to build out kind of the playbooks around that. What does it look like? And as the workforce has turned over kind of since the pandemic, many leaders are new. And we had we had something happen about a week or maybe a month ago where an offsite was scheduled with 60 people at an office that doesn't accommodate 60 people. And there just wasn't that awareness. They were just like, oh, we'll go to this cool city. And so really making sure that we have the tools in place, that people are aware of what our different spaces have. And so we're really working to build that piece out right now.
And that's an interesting point that you made, is just the awareness of employees of what's available to them. I think knowledge sharing is part of it, is that there, as a distributed workforce, you have so many different stakeholders, so many different employees, different time zones, just to make sure that everyone's aware and know what to do, I think is really, really important. And both of you have mentioned, both you and David mentioned the fact that employees are empowered and have playbooks to do so. So that's really interesting to hear. And Danielle from Veza, one of the things that would be interesting is your approach to gathering and keeping employees engaged. You mentioned that basically every employee is an ambassador of the culture. So walk us through this. I think it's really important, and this is how both small and large companies are looking at it. So curious to hear, how do you implement that, and what does it mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is like the age-old question, right? Is how do you get everyone to be an employee ambassador, right? And since, I'm like 2 months in, again, feels like I'm 1 year in, but you kind of evaluate, what do you do in your first, 3 months? What are your P0s? What are the things that you really need to get done in your first 90 days? And for me, to get every single person in the company, and I say this as a, in 200 person company, in order to get everyone to kind of buy into the culture, it really starts with the first 120 days in an employee life cycle. And I say 120 because I'm talking about 90 days, right, into their career at the company, and then 30 days before when they engage. So the first thing that I'm looking at in terms of workplace experience and employee engagement and getting everyone to be an ambassador is, how are we interacting with people and how are we creating a unique experience for when they interview at the company and for when they join the company. So I'm looking at 120 days, and then you really instill the culture and you really instill what your values are at Veza. Our values are might. So there's each individual value for each letter of might, and that kind of instills who we are at the company. And for their first 120 days, they're engaging with our employees when they interview. And then when they get here, it's really about making a unique onboarding experience. And then that travels to their first 90 days. And then that kind of shoots them out to be employee ambassadors for your company and anything that you're trying to do. So it's really about focusing on those first 120 days for me.
And I like it, and we hear this a lot, by the way, that companies, the office is no longer the main attraction for employees to come work for a company. This is actually the company culture, the people, the values, and this really starts from onboarding and interviewing. So it's a really good point in looking at it as part of the employee journey. And I definitely can align and agree
Totally.
with that.
And then after that, if I can just add one more thing, after that is the all hands, right? So you use the first 120 days, and then you make an awesome all hands at the company, and people are just feeling extremely interactive. People are understanding what's going on in the company. People are having a great onboarding experience, and then following that up with company all hands that celebrate the company, celebrate the wins, dive into the statistics of what's happening. And it really just gives time for people to come together, especially in a remote world.
Amazing. We'll talk more about how to celebrate wins, or even just learning from the experience and iterating. And Danielle, question for you. Okta is a very, forward-looking company. It's a tech company. Probably every customer we have uses Okta. And I think what would be interesting to hear is, how do you leverage the fact that it's such a tech-forward company in terms of workplace tools? What data are you looking at to really try to understand employee engagement, workplace operations, and making sure everything runs smoothly?
Yeah, I think like you, we are data people. We really like to lean into the metrics. We leverage a suite of workplace tools and technology to streamline operations, to enhance the employee experience. We are, customers of Gable. We have a large distributed workforce and folks that want to come together that don't live near an office. We've got some occupancy sensors. We've built out, a bunch of space utilization dashboards where we're really tracking who's coming in, what days we're coming in. Super interesting. Our office in Paris, Monday is the big day that everybody comes in, which is really surprising, but I think there's a leader out there that brings his team together on Mondays. And so we start seeing things like that, but being able to identify those things is really interesting. So we're looking at those dashboards, we're monitoring how our offices and our flex spaces are being used. We're integrating our visitor management software and our access control systems to make sure that we know who's in our spaces. And, we can kind of take a look at our peaks and our valleys. We're looking at ticketing and what types of tickets are coming in and all of those pieces, right? And so in terms of metrics, we're looking at a number of key data points, obviously occupancy rates. We're looking at employee feedback, which I haven't mentioned, but the employee feedback loop is so important. There are different groups that utilize different offices, and different offices have different needs. So how are we ensuring that we're aware of those things and able to respond and give those teams the tools and spaces that they need to be successful? We're looking at trends. We're looking even at things like cost, right? I'm building out a bunch of graphs around, our serviced office spaces, or kind of the life cycle of a city within an organization, right? The idea that, okay, we've got a few salespeople there. At what point, now we're using the Gable solution. At what point do we need to transition that to a serviced office? At what point do we need to transition that to a hub? So we're really looking at a lot of cost models around those pieces to help us understand that decision making. And then also Okta has a strong commitment to the environment. And so we're also taking a look at a lot of environmental metrics, energy consumption. If I book travel, it tells me how many tons of, exhaust my flight is doing. So anyways, we're looking at all of those pieces.
And I think one thing that, first of all, thank you. One thing that stood out to me is I think it's a very new approach to defining when do you need to build out new offices, or in general, even behavioral metrics on top of just stats. For example, you mentioned the Paris leader. Like this is an interesting type of a cultural behavior, right? That I'm sure will have variability in different offices, and this will also can make that data-driven decisions on what does it mean for the office itself. I'm sure. Another aspect that you mentioned is, before we've heard this all the time. There are people, like we've hired a bunch of people in specific location. It means that immediately they need to have an office. But what you're looking at is, okay, what is the actual demand for an office versus going and just having one? And I think this is probably one of the biggest changes that we see, is really how companies are becoming data-driven in opening and closing offices. I just wanted to highlight that. And David, really similar question to you, I would say. What strategies and tactics do you really deploy at Logitech, both in terms of, your own tools, but a lot of the plethora of things, of initiatives that you mentioned, to stay connected and collaborate efficiently, regardless of where they're working? Yeah.
Sure. We live and breathe by our employee engagement survey. We do a full survey once a year, and we do a check-in a second time. That check-in we were able to make about hybrid work. So the whole focus of it was around our hybrid work program. That was our first survey. And so our engagement scores are above 80. And for those of you that know, anything 70 or above is great. When you're in the high 70s, you really never think you're going to get any higher. You do, all these programs, and you try to, make strides, but we were able to tip the 80% point. And we're very proud of that. But when we looked at our hybrid work score, and we looked at, in particular, 2 questions: being in the office has a positive impact on my sense of belonging. And the second question, the impact of being in the office is worth my commute time. We knew we had a lot of work to do. Those were sub 70, 67%. As a leadership team, when we looked at the results of those scores, everybody gasped. And I was like, this is great. I mean, think about it. It's so controversial. You make one decision, 50% of the people happy, 50% of the people are not happy. So the fact that we had a majority of people saying that they understood our hybrid work program, they understood what we're trying to do, and they were mostly abiding by it, I think was great. But we are focused on getting that 67% score up to 70. And the way we're doing that is we're actually leveraging a lot of our own technology. We have a huge installed base of hardware in offices when you think about video conferencing. And our video conferencing with AI can collect the number of seats in the room and the number of people. And if you bring an extra chair in, the AI can count that. So we can always see the occupancy of a room. And if someone doesn't use video conferencing, there's a people counter that can be turned on that can count the number of people in the room as well. So what we look at is, are rooms being deployed efficiently? Are people using them? Do we need to change the furniture in them? Do we need to make it more collaborative? Do we need to make it more creative? And then we also look at the desks, and I have this war with desks to reduce desks throughout the company. And we have a product called Logitech Flex, which is a desk booking system. It's not the hardware, but it's not the software, but it's the hardware that sits on the desk. It looks like a little iPad. And when you book a desk through many different, we're agnostic to the software. When you book a desk, your name pops up. When you sit down, you check in, and it can have everything from your family pictures to other personalized things when you sit at an unassigned desk to make it feel more like your own. And so we're leveraging our own technology that way. We are also in a fight for no sensors, because we have a lot of installed technology that can gather utilization data. And sensors are, in my opinion, not the most sustainable thing. It's a single use. And so anything that Logitech produces it has dual use, and that really has a positive effect on carbon around the world.
Incredible. Really interesting. Question for Danielle from Veza. One of the things that would be interesting is really, even in a smaller company, is the metrics and measurement. How do you monitor and measure the adoption of different initiatives? If you can talk about this, especially as a smaller team, and also what are the results that you're looking to achieve in terms of employee engagement? What's your North Star there?
Yeah, totally. So I'll give you two. Okay, so one is extremely usable and makes a lot of sense. The other one I don't recommend in any way, shape, or form. Has no metric value, has no NPS, no substance to it, but it's just something that I really like to do. Okay, so the first one that has substance to it, right, are culture amp scores, surveys, anything anonymous. So especially at a company with 200 people, I'm constantly trying to figure out how to engage people, how to make our all hands super successful, how to, we just launched at Veza, Veza Palooza every quarter, right? Where we all come together and we do some really fun activities and we get to be together no matter where you are, et cetera. The surveys and the culture amp stuff that we use is so valuable, but only if it's anonymous for me. So if employees are able to anonymously tell me what did they like, what did they not like, and what could they improve on everything that I do, that's how I measure success and how people are feeling about the programs that we're really trying to push out. Okay. The next one, which I do not recommend in any way, shape, or form, has no value whatsoever on paper, are just people coming up to me virtually or in person and say, that was freaking awesome, right? Especially people who have never talked in the company before or spoken up, or, might not have really, given their thoughts initially. But if I'm getting Slack messages from people just being like, yo, that was so sick, that was so much fun, we had a really good time. To me, I'm like, okay, that's successful. That's going well. So on one hand, we've got the actual substance, right? Anonymous surveys that people are telling me what they like, what they don't like. And then the non-substantial one, which people are just like, yeah, this was awesome. This was so sick. So that's kind of how I measure the programs.
Excellent. And I think, again, the importance is both quantitative and qualitative data. And that's exactly to your point.
Totally.
I think. Excellent. And Danielle, you mentioned a little bit in terms of employees survey engagement. So would love to hear from you as well in terms of how does this shape your strategies on bringing people together. And the second question would be, what are programs like similar to David that mentioned a few that you are doing to bring people together?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that like many companies, as Okta, and I remember this from Zendesk where I worked previously, as the in-office culture was no longer kind of the driver of what we did and how we did it. Over time, we did see engagement scores kind of drop. And, I can share that I had my first virtual remote onboarding experience with Okta about 3.5 months ago. And Okta does a great job. They hooked me up with a buddy. They had a lot of pieces along the way to bring you in, but it was very different. And you're kind of like, oh, I'm alone in my living room, you know? And so, you really have to, I think Daniel mentioned earlier the idea of the employee life cycle and how are we creating alignment and building community really from day one. And so, Okta is really trying to think very holistically about how do we do that. I mentioned, or maybe I didn't, I don't recall now, but one of the things that we're doing is really getting intentional about coming together. And one way that that looks is kind of an in-office day program. And a lot of teams have taken sort of the first step, which is to say, hey, Wednesday is our team collaboration day. Everybody should come to the office on Wednesday. And that's good. I think that that's a great first step for folks. But um, so I come to the office on Wednesday and now I'm sitting at the office and my coworkers are there, but I don't necessarily have any planned interactions with them. Did my manager come? Did their manager come? And so really, again, building out guidelines for bringing your teams together and really helping enable teams to make that time a success so that when we're asking them later, they're like, yes, it was worth the commute. Yes, I accomplished more than I would have accomplished if I had just stayed home today. So that's a big one that we're working on. Another is I think I mentioned that Okta has a strong culture of team offsites and coming together. What if we made that rather than team based, made it more geographical, where we're doing kind of quarterly team building events and even doing those not only in our cities where we have office locations, but also in other cities where we just have pockets of employees that are more distributed or remote. And so, how do we do that? We are programatizing our global events so that it's a little bit more aligned and we're kind of doing things as a global team rather than each office doing things sort of separately. So we can kind of standardize how teams host events and what that looks like. And then I think the virtual engagement program and what does it look like to do things that include our folks that aren't near an office. And so,
Oh,
the idea being to ensure everybody kind of feels connected to broader Okta community and culture.
I think that's so interesting what you mentioned, and I'm curious to hear from the rest of the panelists as well on this. Is the fact that you're bringing teams together that might not be from the same department. It's just the local chapters. I'm curious to hear why this is something that you've decided has value versus just departments, right?
I'll start since
Yeah.
I brought that up. I think it has value, particularly when you don't have an office, right? And so I am an Okta employee. I live in Denver, Colorado, and we don't have an office there. Are there other Okta employees? Can I, and you start feeling like I was talking to a guy in Frankfurt, Germany, who's in a serviced office location that we're going to close due to lack of utilization. And he was like in the space by himself. And he was like, I'm not sure that there are any other Okta employees in Frankfurt other than my manager. And that's what we want to avoid, right? And he was new to the company and so forth. And so totally get that. But, we want to, again, I think it goes to creating a sense of community and who is Okta outside of the work that we're doing and how does my work fit into it? And when you start hearing how your neighbor's work fits into it, now you're really starting to build a bigger picture and you can see how the whole thing comes together. And I think that that's really powerful for people really understanding what everybody's piece of the puzzle is, for relationship building and for motivation and all of those things. So I really love the geographical aspect, as well.
Yeah,
Excellent.
and I can piggyback off that too. Kind of what Danielle from Okta was saying was having that sense of community cross-functionally is so important, right? Because if I can meet people that have nothing to do, especially at a company of their size, I used to be at a company with about 1,500 people. We had about 8 global office locations. If I can cross-functionally meet and interact with people who have nothing to do with me, I can really start to establish myself, having a sense of community and having friends and having people to talk to when it has nothing to do with what I'm working on. And I think that is so important.
Excellent. David, anything to add from your perspective in terms of just the programming for events and offsites and how is Logitech thinking about this?
Sure. I'm just really impressed with what the panelists shared, and we're doing a fraction of those things, but I'm learning as we go here as well. So thank you. We try to bring people together. I'll just answer that first question, bring people together in different groups because we are trying to create a culture at Logitech. We have employees that have been with the company 20, 30 years. It's not uncommon to see those folks, and they have a lot to offer for the folks that are new. And our culture is rich, but it also needs to evolve. And so one of the things that we do when we bring people together that are in different teams, we're focused on shared learning around, and everyone's going to laugh, around artificial intelligence, around storytelling and selling, because everyone at Logitech should be selling our products. And then we are all engaged in, throughout the pandemic, our product development cycle just became elongated. And so we are all trying to get that product development cycle reduced. And we all have goals that tie to those 3 things. And so when we get together, let's say I'm in an office down in Miami and I'm with someone who's on the sales team for Peru, we may not have a whole lot in common other than talking about space, but we are able to sit down, have a Cuban coffee, and talk about one of those 3 learning priorities. And then
Excellent.
offsite, we've learned that our engagement scores for remote employees, we noticed 2 groups. Employees that were hired as remote, really high scores. Employees that went remote after working at the company for, let's say, 10 years and then stayed remote during the pandemic, huge drop in their scores. And so one of the things that we decided to do is to, and most of our remote employees are in the Americas, is to have an East Coast remote hub, a Midwest remote hub, and a West Coast remote hub. And there's a site lead for those remote hubs, and they have their own huddles and they have their own events. And we found that that's starting to help a little bit with engagement. And then also with Gable, we are starting to leverage Gable events to bring people together. And then in locations like Dallas, where we don't have a physical location, we're challenging the team that if they want to have an office to use a Gable, and we're tracking Gable utilization to see if we hit that number on a regular basis, whereby we would want to open one of our own offices.
Excellent. Thank you. I have one last question, but I think there is a great question from the audience that I would love your take on. This is related to programming. And if you can share a little bit about guidelines that you have created for employees on how to gather and what is available for them. So would love whoever wants to take it to share a little bit in terms of what resources are available for employees, how you distribute them, and what's your expectation and who will drive those?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, it is. It is. I'll share, we're working on we may have to workshop this name a little bit, but kind of a day in the office in a box, sort of guideline for I think it's geared towards managers and team leaders, and it's intended to show them how to leverage what's already available in or near our office spaces, whether that's the coffee machines, what day lunch is served, are there ERG events happening that week? Maybe what's nearby, are there walking trails, building amenities that we could take advantage of that could enhance a team day? It could include some suggestions for like, what do you do when you all come together? What sort of work makes sense for your team to focus on those in-person days? Do you have like team level agreements in place, and how could you put those in place if you don't? And so those are some of the things that we're kind of thinking about, with the expectation then that those managers and team leaders would then drive and initiate those in-office days. So
Just to add to Danielle's point, I love the idea of team agreements. We do those as well, and we try to refresh them every 6 months. But I think we could get more of a process going whereby those are published and people can see them outside of the team. In terms of events and bringing people together and making their time worth it, I think an underutilized asset is a P&C business partner, an HR business partner. I think in the past, we looked at HR business partners as, I have a problem, help me solve it. But the more you can get them embedded within the fabric of your team, they become a champion for that kind of camaraderie and learning and just the magic that happens when people come together.
Excellent. And Danielle, anything to add in terms of the employee experience, and how do you work on that in a smaller setting?
Yeah, totally. I always have something to add about employee experience, you know? Now, for me personally, especially in a smaller setting, it's just about being the person that is the most excited about what you're doing. So you need to give it like 250%. If you're, throwing in an initiative or workplace guidelines or anything that you're doing, you're the one setting the example. You're the one that's the most excited, and you're the one that's doing it to a T, and people will follow suit and adopt what you're trying to do because you're so excited about it. So that's just the nugget of advice from me, is be that person, whether it's someone on your team or you yourself, or find that person that's going to be, at my last company, I don't know if any one of them is watching right now, but they call me the woo wizard because all I would do is just be like, woo, and finding a person to be that person to follow all the guidelines. People will follow suit and people will be excited about it.
I love the somebody on the chat said King of Woo. So definitely really, really cool.
There you go. Yeah, it happens.
One last question I have, David, this is for you. In terms of, and we talked a little bit about this before, but Logitech has a lot of offices in general. There are companies that have been around, of course, pre-pandemic, but have a lot of offices. Can you talk us through a little bit about the strategy of opening and closing offices, and how do you leverage, the money for closed offices, right, and funnel this back to employee experience?
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't think we're going through the portfolio and saying, okay, let's optimize and close and optimize and close. But we are taking advantage of the market. There are historic lows with rents. We are doing early negotiations on leases. In some cases, we're taking less space, but we seem to be spending a lot of money on the build out. And we seem to be just investing in higher quality space, better location. And so I wouldn't say that this is about cost savings by any means. I think we live and breathe by the employee experience, by employee engagement. When you think about the human capital costs for a company and the real estate costs, real estate costs are a fraction. And if you don't invest enough to bring those people together, they're just not going to come together, and that magic isn't going to happen. And I think at least what we're focused on is several times a year bringing teams together. And we're really focused on this thing called the onsite offsite. So bringing folks together to our hubs. And then in terms of new locations, we really just try to locate near the customer, and then we try to have our offices be the showroom. We're supposed to be modeling those future ways of working and bringing customers in. And the thing that keeps me up at night is having an empty office when a customer comes in. And so we're very, very careful about our location strategy.
For me, David, it's
Amazing.
interviews. So whenever we have interviews on site and there's nobody in the office, people are just like, yeah, totally.
You feel personally responsible.
Absolutely.
I love it. And I think one last thing to add here is that we've actually, again, going back to data, one of the things that are really important for employees when they do come to office, we talked about the people, but it's actually the quality of the space. So really focusing on that experience, so I really resonate, and the data supports what you're saying, that, you know, this is how you invest in that aspect. We are at time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our phenomenal panelists, for really providing so many nuggets of wisdom. As someone said on the chat, really thank you, everyone, for joining, and see you next time for another episode of our webinar. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.